everyone. Thank you so much for coming today, and thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm realizing that the bio is written badly because it was hard to read, right? So that's a cue that I'm gonna go ahead and redo that one. So I'm gonna talk to you guys today about the Agile L&D, what I like to call Agile L&D. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Hope you enjoy this. I've got 40 minutes. I'm gonna try to make this as painless as possible for you. You guys have seen this, right? It's a really unique moment in history. I don't need to explain this screen. But what the pandemic did actually is accelerate things that were already in process, right? We all know that digital transformation was coming. It hit India probably first and hardest. And we continue to be obsessed with how this evolution is going. But what the pandemic also showed is an acceleration of remote. So what we see here, that society is changing. We know that it's changing. Look, I love this screenshot right here from the BBC World, who actually thinks that emoji translator is a role, right? I would love to have that role. I don't know how much you get paid for it, but I think I'm pretty qualified. But also what we see, sorry, I just want to make sure. Yeah. What we see is that the pandemic transformed industries. Here we have telemedicine, right? When the pandemic started, the engagement that healthcare providers had with their patients were cut, right? We all know that. They couldn't go to the hospital. We couldn't go see the doctor. And for 20, 30, 40 years, we have been saying, we've had the technology to do telemedicine, but what stopped us? Why didn't we do telemedicine before? Because doctors were saying, no, I need to see patients. Nurses, everyone around said they need to come in, we need to look at them, we need to be in real life. And patients were saying, no, I don't feel like I've actually had a consultation unless I'm sitting there, right there in front of my doctor. And the pandemic said, no, you can't do that anymore. So within 3 months, globally, all healthcare providers, or almost all healthcare providers, regardless of the country you were in, switched to telemedicine, right? And what we see now coming out of the pandemic is that people are saying, no, for a lot of things, we want to continue that telemedicine. So we see that actually people were the heart of that transformation, the digital transformation that happened in telemedicine, not the technology, because there was no new technology that came out of that, really. And so what we also see is that generations are forever touched. I like this slide right here because it tells you about children, right? And how children are seeing there. This is a letter to Santa. You remember writing a letter to Santa? Maybe not. Here, it's, if you're celebrating Christmas, children would write letters to Santa. And this one is just to show you how modern people are today. Yeah, this is the new list to Santa. This is what I want, right? So generations are changed, and some people are adapting a little bit better than others, right? Look at this one. This woman, the GPS told her to drive into a lake, and she listened. So there she is, there's her car. Now, I hear some laughter out there, right? Of course there's laughter, because today we see this as, of course we wouldn't do that, right? But think about 10 years ago when we were driving with our GPS, how nervous we were. Should we listen to it? Should we not? Should we follow it? It's telling us to go down that way. That doesn't seem right to me. Today, it becomes natural. We're using a GPS to find everything today, right? And so we see that we've made that transition. So today, this is what we see. We see joggers turning on their GPS to run and make awesome designs across their city to draw using the GPS. This is where we are today. The slide before, a woman drove her car into a lake using the same technology. So we see this transformation happening, and we see we're changed. But what does that mean for the work environment, your work environment, right? We are transforming, but is work transforming? What's happening there? And so if transformation has become an everyday reality, right? We're changing every day. Companies are changing every day. Reskilling is really the biggest opportunity, but it's also the biggest challenge. So the question I put today is, is your L&D team ready? But actually, I want to know if your HR team is ready, right? Because they are the agents of change. So how do we go about this? Well, the first thing I wanted to talk to you about really is around how Degreed, the company I work for, thinks about the future of learning. It's on 3 pillars, this future of learning. First, we think learning is driven by demand, right? And that demand is increasing every day. And I'll show you some research on why and how that demand is evolving. I really like the quote that you see here under Driven by Demand by one of our clients, CLO, visionary of a telecoms company in Europe. And what she says is, we're moving from matching people to jobs into matching skills to work, right? So we're kind of getting rid of that traditional job role, and we're looking at it one level down, granular, into what we are focusing on skills. Do you have the skills to do this current job? If you do, can we move you there? And so that principle is actually driving learning, the demand of learning. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The second principle is about woven into work. So a lot of you, if you follow Josh Bersin, heard about learning in the flow of work. Here, he's talking about more systemic technology tools that you might have to integrate learning in your systems of performance. But we've widened that kind of principle and said, actually, it's on-the-job training. It's every opportunity you have to upskill, because we think that it's woven into every part of work, not just when you're in front of a computer. And especially those workers who don't have desks, how do we weave that learning into work? And the third one is powered by people. We know with the pandemic, there was a lot of furloughs. There were a lot of people who couldn't, a lot of teams, functional teams that were reduced. And when we're looking at that, what we want to make sure is that we have an ecosystem of people around you that are responsible for the development, not just the employee. When we say, I get a lot of CLOs coming to me saying, how do I create that self-driven culture? And what we like to say at Degreed is, we're not interested in a self-driven culture. We're interested in a positive learning culture. And when you have a positive learning culture, it automatically becomes self-driven. So the goal is not to create a self-driven culture of learning, flip that learning culture when everybody says, can you create a great learning culture within my organization? What we tend to focus on is the things we can measure, which is positivity, engagement. So those are the types of principles that I want to talk to you about today. So let's get started on the first one, driven by demand. Here's Michael Dell. He created Dell Technology. And he created it in the 90s when it was really actually no demand out there, not demand for personal computers. And he took a principle and started deploying that, saying, hey, if I send you a computer directly to your home, I think I can supply that in different ways. And so it increased demand. So he was really creative and looked at that new opportunity. And so I want to share with you some data from how the workforce learns. It's research that Degreed has done. This is this year's version of it. And show you some data around why people update their skills profiles, why do they want to work, why do they want to increase skills. And when we look at it, it's not only just for performance. Remember, everybody wanted to learn so they could do their job better. Now, what people want is they want to learn so they can get that new opportunity. And it's not just about promotion, new opportunity, right? It's about, can I get exposure to things that are going to help me increase my skill level? right? And so when they do that, we see that if it's not just to perform your job, it's also to get the next job, they're asking for much more learning than they had in the past. And they're expecting it. And the younger the generation, the more they're expecting that from their employer, right? Remember when we used to say, okay, you know, we're not gonna teach you Microsoft Office, you're expected to know that. Now, people coming into the workforce say, I have a huge learning potential, I have a growth mindset, so you teach me what I need to learn. And so that changes the supply and demand a little bit. So what can you do? My first tip for creating agile organizations is think about how you're going to supply that demand a little differently and be more agile about it. What we're talking about is shifting from maybe developing courses, customized, bespoke courses over 3 or 6 months to reduce that to 3 or 6 weeks. Right? So a faster turnaround time in terms of demand. And the ways you can do that is you can make it faster, right? Design the marketplaces. Marketplaces are a great place to kind of license content. Maybe you take 80% of that content, you put 20% of that customized that gives that corporate flavor of whatever organization you're working in, and that's going to help accelerate that. A little hint that suppliers will not tell you when you're developing that e-learning module or when you're developing that content is they've probably already done it before, and they're probably doing a lot of reuse. But you're getting charged for that 80% that they've already developed somewhere else. That's how they make their monies. So when you're talking to bespoke people, make sure you're challenging them on that. A lot of that content is generic. Don't let them charge you for bespoke when they are just doing copy-paste. The other ways is buying better. So this is where I'd like you to challenge your suppliers again, right? And you say, I probably don't need a huge catalog because I don't understand the need. That market of buying the entire catalog and saying, oh, I have, 500,000 pieces of content for your employees. When you buy that and you get 10% use, there's a problem. Either we don't understand the content enough, you don't understand the need of your employees enough, or the content's not relevant. So challenge them for different models, like pay-per-use, like decentralized models where people can, that are closest to the need can actually buy the content themselves. Right? Instead of a group level type of thing where you say, I'm gonna buy it for the entire group. I know none of the population, but I'm gonna go ahead and invest in this and I'm gonna get low MAU. And then my boss 3 years later is gonna come down and say, why did you buy that? Right? So we wanna avoid that by being very smart about the way you buy. The next two are combined. Curate more, get smarter about using content that's free and open, but also make sure that you have a format where it's easily consumable. So playlists, like Spotify playlists, or I don't even want to say Netflix, because everybody says, well, Netflix, that AI that gives me those recommendations, it's crap, right? So I don't want to say that, but leveraging kind of technologies that will allow you to create these playlists and target them to the people who need it, that's a really good way of supplying demand very quickly. And I'm going to talk a little bit about curation a little bit later. But I want to go quickly to the next topic. Do you guys recognize this person? Well, okay, wait, hold on. Yeah, I should have did a little bit more animation on that content. It's Charles Jennings. And Charles Jennings is one of the co-founders of 70-20-10. And when I say 70-20-10 in Europe, where I'm based, I get a lot of people looking at me saying, why are you talking about such an old model, right? This model is what, from the 90s? Or early 2000s, it's at least 20 years old, right? I learned it in university, 70-20-10, I think. I'm not sure. I might be lying to make myself younger. So when we're looking at this, I like what Charles has to say. First off, let's separate training from learning, right? Training is an event, learning is something that happens every day. But the second principle that's really interesting about what Charles has to say is really around how we learn. So the 70-20-10, and I'm gonna say it for those who don't know it. I know that all of you do know it, and you're shaking your heads and saying, yeah, we know it. But I'm gonna restate it for those of you who won't admit that you don't know what that is. 70-20-10. 70% of learning actually happens, these slides are in the reverse order. Sorry. I'm just gonna say it. 70% of learning actually happens within ourselves, right? It's self-paced, it's learning by doing, right? Learning self-paced, we learn by ourselves. 20% of that is our ecosystem. It's social learning, it's people who teach us things. We watch people do things, that's how we also learn. Learning on the job is a really good example of that 20%. And only 10% is formal learning. Now that could be the learning that you learn in university or formalized schools, but what we mean here and what Charles means here is that's the L&D department. That's training, right? That's that formal, structured training that you're talking about. So when you think about it, 90% of learning is informal, and only 10% is formal. So I want you guys to just think about your own roles, your own learning departments. If you're HR globally, think about the training activity. How much time and money does your L&D team spend on that 10% versus how much time are you spending on the 90% where people actually learn? Now, I was a CLO of Dannon, the little yogurt company of about 100,000 people globally, and I can be very honest, I spent 80% of my time worrying about that 10%. And probably 90% of my budget worrying about that 10%. Most of my budget went to content and suppliers instead of trying to create that ecosystem. So the second area of woven into work is to actually look across. What do we mean by woven into work? And I'm gonna stand here because I see a lot of people taking pictures. I love this screen. Degreed has had this screen for years, but it's finally become relevant to everybody, right? So it's quite visionary. I didn't create it, but I love this screen because it really talks about what are the activities or what we consider in the flow of work and what are the activities we're looking outside the flow of work. And when you look at this, you can say all of this, or most of this, a lot of that is at 10%, and a lot of that is at 90% that we're looking at. So we've got the wrong focus when we're talking about woven into work. And so the future is gonna be more of this and less of this, or at least less time spent on it, right? So the second tip about woven into work and creating an agile L&D organization is really around future-proofing your tech stack. Now, a lot of you probably know Degreed. It doesn't have all these features in here. It might one day, but these are the features, whether you have one vendor, two vendors, or an ecosystem of connected vendors for your tech stack, these are the features that are really important for future facing and to create agility, not only with your L&D team, but create agility within your organization. I'm gonna quickly go over some of these. Employee-owned, self-directed, we talked about that earlier, right? They need to feel like that platform is theirs, but it also has to anticipate the future. So a platform that's not going to only help do their jobs today, but something that will help them do it tomorrow. AI-driven, relevant, I have a lot of controversy around that because people are saying recommendations are not relevant. AI is getting better, it's getting smarter. Not all vendors use the same types of AI technology, but if you find a vendor that is using AI to help create relevancy and surface the content that your individuals are looking for, actually what it's gonna do is create personalization. Right? And it's not always perfect. It's a feed the beast mentality. The more you feed it, the more relevant it becomes. But it's hard to detect that, right? We don't know why people click on things. To be honest, even Degreed, we don't know why you click on that content. We're making an assumption that it's because you like it or need it, right? But it's really, really hard. So the relevancy, give it a little bit of time, we'll get better, computers will get smarter. Employee curated pathways. Now, I mentioned a little bit about that in the first tip I gave you around that ability for anybody to be an expert. I like to say create, if you're working for a company that has 50,000 employees, create 50,000 internal trainers by giving them the ability to have a voice. Learning in the flow of work, I'm going to skip that one. Of course, it should have things around experiential. For me, the definition of learning versus skills is learning is knowledge acquisition. Skills is the application of that knowledge towards something, right? So giving them time to practice will build their skill. Giving them time to learn will build their knowledge. So make sure you're focusing on skills building and not just knowledge building. Nudges, triggers, digital marketing, it's busy. Everybody, we asked you to turn off your mobile phones before you came in here. How many of you really did it? You just silenced them and you didn't turn them off, right? You're not going, even on the airplane, I don't go into airplane mode. So people are distracted. They like that distraction. So how does L&D get their attention and get them focused on the right thing? Having a system that kind of meets that demand and using the same marketing techniques that they use to, I'm not saying create clickbait, right? But use some of those techniques to grab their attention. And using marketing and digital marketing is really good for that. Skills, data, and insight. Who's got an Apple Watch on, or a fitness watch, or something that actually tracks your movement? That's great. I use mine too. And mine sits there and tells me, hey, you haven't stood up in over an hour. So I need something to tell me that I haven't stood up. It didn't tell me to stand up. It says you haven't stood up in over an hour. Actually, it just tells me about the way I move, and that information helps me to process and say, hey, I need to move better. So giving people the skills insights of how they learn, when they learn, what they learn, how far their skill advanced, after they learned, that's going to help them learn better, learning how to learn. So that principle of giving data insights is really, really important to understanding me as a holistic learner and helping them to understand how they can be a holistic learner. And then finally, communities of practice and interest, of course. This is the 20% that I've talked about, right? This is how do you create a community of people who can learn off of each other, who can mentor, coach each other, do some reverse mentoring because we have lots of new generation out there. So when we're looking at communities of practice and communities of interest, you want to make sure whether it's on, you're using Teams or Slack or Degreed, those types of platforms, you want to make sure that you have community leaders that can help create that. So any kind of platform is good. At Degreed, we use Slack, and we integrate that, and we have a lot of learning coming in because it's not, it's that knowledge part, right? But don't forget this part. Not only you need the knowledge in the communities, but you need to make sure that those communities allow people to practice, shadow, stretch assignments, giving them new opportunities to do and not just to learn. All right, oops, I just accidentally went back. Last principle, and this one's a longer one. This one is Max Brooks. Anybody read Zombie Survival Guide, Complete Protection to the Living Dead? Oh, awesome. I never get anybody raising their hands, so we'll talk about that afterwards. Yeah. Oh, okay, so yeah, this is an awesome guide. And I love Max Brooks. The principle, and I'm sorry, first I talked about Christmas, now I'm talking about building your arc. Sorry for the cultural insensitivity of, I usually give this speech in Europe where there are a lot of Christians, and so there's a lot of references there. But I think this one, I hope you guys will know the reference around Noah's Ark, right? And so what Max is explaining is that he says you can wait, and this is really funny considering the zombie apocalypse that's coming, right? He says you can wait, and you can start building your ark when you start seeing those first drops of rain, or you can start now. And starting now means looking at the skills of your L&D team. So that's what I want to talk about last. The skills actually required are going to help build the ecosystem that you see here. Here's another bit of research from How the Workforce Learns this year. And what we see is that it's everybody's job. And if you squint a little bit, what you see is up here, individual workers, you see that's 65, 63%. This is how they learn, right? Does anybody know the most popular learning system in every organization across the globe? Someone can guess this. YouTube, nearly, very close. Google. Yeah, it's Google search. It's the #1 learning system because everybody goes there first, right? And so what we try to do is we're trying to hijack that and say, go to your learning system first because we can increase the relevancy of your learning system if you have not only the tech stack I talked about, but the ecosystem to support that. And so what do we see here? We see this, we ask this, we're in year 4 of How the Workforce Learns, and we ask this question every year, and every year, the blue and the salmon parts increase, and every year, L&D and L&T teams decrease. So we see this trend coming. What we see is, if you squint a little bit, individual workers, well, it's not 70%, and Charles Jennings is very clear about, he said 70-20-10 is not an exact science, obviously it's a principle to understand where learning is happening, right? And so when we're looking at individual workers, we see that the vast majority of what they do is individual, right? They get a lot from their managers and peers. And last year, this was really down. This year, what we see is a huge increase in all of that. And then the L&D teams, I actually learned from my company system. Yeah, it's, everybody has to go there because they have to. Compliance training, regulatory training, mandatory training. They go because they have to. Why do they come back? And so that's the question we have to ask ourselves. Why would they come back if they don't have to? And a lot of people complain is, oh, my LMS, I've invested in it. Why don't I have people coming back? It's because you've invested in things they don't care about. You've invested in the things that your company cares about, but what about them? Remember the research I'm talking about. They care about upskilling. They care about their next job. If you're investing and you're not doing that, you're not creating the right positive learning culture that you need to. And again, you don't just need one system. You probably need a lot. Look at all of these systems mentioned. I'm not advocating for one platform. I'm advocating for an ecosystem of platforms that make sense. So what does that mean for us? Oh, there's the slide. Well, I did have this slide, and I put it in the wrong spot. So here's 70-20-10. Learning is woven into work. You see that 70% here, 20%, and of course, L&D pretty far from that ecosystem, right? So how do we leverage that? How do we get proximity that we want? My suggestion is looking at the skills of your org first, because they are the change agents, right? But are they equipped to change during this new phase of corporate universities that I'm talking about, this kind of supply and demand, driven by demand, woven into work and powered by people, these 3 principles, are they ready for that? So I wanna suggest, now these are just suggestions on ways that those roles, if you have these roles within your organization, how you can upskill them and create agility in what they do. So the first one, very quickly, and I've got slides behind this, so I'm gonna go really quickly on this, or try to, is performance detective. Learning manager is an order taker today. Most learning managers get in front of their stakeholders tell them they need a training course, and they say, okay, they write it down, they talk about the vendors they can select, and they don't challenge them. I hear people say all the time, how do I get to Kirkpatrick's level 4? And the answer is you start there. You don't do training, and that's what performance consultants do. Those really expensive Deloitte and Accenture and Infosys consultants that come in and tell you what you need to do. The reason why they're so expensive is because they don't ask that question. They don't say, what do you need me to do? They say, let me look at your ecosystem and I'll tell you what to do, right? And so they ask the first question to their stakeholders is, what KPI do you want me to change? What is it that you need to change? And based on that, I will do an analysis. I'm going to look at, for example, if you sit there and say, well, in a regular world of learning managers, you might have them say, well, I need to change, I have bad data in my financial system in SAP. I need training on SAP. The regular learning manager will say, yeah, okay, let's do training on SAP. The performance detective will look at the system first. Does it make sense? Is it the clearest it can be? Are the workflows cleared? The second thing is to look around the ways people work, maybe observe them working, maybe see those kinds of changes. And if they see that training is a gap, they'll create the training. But if they see that the system is a gap, they're going to redo the system. So that's the difference between performance detective and learning manager. And so we really need to have a clear idea of what is the remit of L&D today. Instructional designers, that's very clear. Experience engineers. So a little bit more upskilling around how does experience integrate into a training course? How can I be a little bit more creative? How can we get out of the classroom to train, right? Experiential learning, that's a really, really hot topic for the next few years because that's really the way people want to learn. And then we have those technologies like Google Glass that actually can overlay learning tools, work tools. What we see is we really need to wake up and start doing a lot more experiential learning. HR communications, I have a slide that's going to explain growth hacking if you don't know it in just a second. But instead of taking someone from HR and communications that barely understands your programs, why don't you integrate someone who really deeply understands your programs by getting an engineer, someone from marketing to help you like reach your audience and engage newly with your audience. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Oops. And then, curators, influencers, how do we transform an SME that has a dictionary in their head to an influencer that knows how to create content and push it out there, to be really have the pulse of their population. You can't tell a YouTuber what to do. As soon as you tell a YouTuber what to do, their ratings go down. Why? Because they have the pulse of their community. They understand what their community wants. They know how to engage with them. So leverage that. Teach them to understand that and leverage it in your organization. And finally, community managers, those poor learning admin that are stuck on your LMS system all day long. They understand the population they're dealing with. Why don't you convert them and give them a more interesting job around community management? If I'm a training admin and I'm always deploying finance courses, I know those finance people. I know the stakeholders. I know who's coming to my courses. I know that community. Why can't I use that knowledge to apply it to actually engaging with the community and making sure that they're learning with each other? So their new role becomes a facilitator learning, teaching others how to learn instead of telling them what to learn. You know, that's really important. So just a deep dive into this, and then I'll end it. I have 7 minutes left, and I wanted to get to some questions, so I'm going to go quickly. Is really upskilling your learning manager. What are the skills today that they have? That's the portable skills that they can use to be a detective, a performance detective. So the new skills, actually, they need to understand their ecosystem. Sorry, I'm going to get over here because I see people craning their heads. They need to understand systemic thinking. This is the role of a consultant, a performance consultant, right? They need to understand questioning. They need to know how to ask the right questions. They need to do problem solving because it's not always a training problem. Remember that. They need to understand the business and process because when you're looking at that and you're trying to evaluate whether or not you need training for a really badly designed system, you need to understand the workflows and how people work, right? So it's a little bit more global than understanding what they need to learn for a function. So then they'll need to upskill on that, or better yet, take someone from the function. Take someone from, and we hear that all the time. And learning, I hated that. I hated when someone said, hey, we're going to give you a finance guy, and they're going to be your learning manager for finance. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, I've got to teach them about pedagogy. I need to teach them about, designing really great classrooms. And in fact, I'm ignoring where they have strengths, is they know ins and out of every job. So why can't I use that person to actually help me to understand better how I can impact the business by increasing performance instead of looking at checking a box off for training, right? And then finally, any kind of tech knowledge they might have around human performance, how to assess, how to get that out of that is obviously a huge benefit to be able to convert. So start looking around in your ecosystem and saying, maybe I can give a new remit to my learning managers, right? And it'll be exciting for them too, most of the time. And the ones that don't, you can do something else with them. The second one is, I talked a little bit about your training admin. They sit all day in that LMS, they're working, but they know all of those elements that I talked about, including cohort management, right? And so what can you do? You teach them about how to engage on digital platforms. Sometimes if you have a system like an LXP, you can teach them about that. But if you don't have an LXP, you can still teach them about all of the other digital communications and how to reach those audiences within that ecosystem, right? And sometimes reaching the audience means to leverage LinkedIn just to reach into a lot of people. That's how they communicate. It's like, oh, I found that expert on LinkedIn. They didn't find it in their internal systems that we work at the same company. It's crazy, but people do that because they don't have the right tech stack, because they're not looking in the right places. But obviously, another way to understand what you need is through that content creation, making sure they know how to create content and making sure they know how to share that across. Giving a megaphone to your SME, I talked about that. It's really important to turn them into influencers at this point. That means that you're going to teach them a little bit. Oh, sorry, I keep walking over here. Sorry about that. Is really about how to engage with audiences. They know the content. You're going to teach them how to shorten that content to make it relevant. But you know what? A lot of that is auto-taught. I put out content, and if you have a system that shows engagement levels, they'll understand. That's why Facebook, that's why all of them, when you do content creation, you see your engagement levels, because they're trying to teach you how to better engage. So when you see you throw out a piece of content, everybody drops off on slide 3, okay. Well, I understand where my problem is. Nobody cares about slide 4 and beyond because I haven't been engaging enough. So teaching them a little bit about that is really, really important. And then giving them a megaphone, letting them create content wherever they want to. Finally, final slide, and then I'll take questions for, 2 minutes. Hire a growth hacker. Anybody has hired a growth hacker or even knows what growth hacking is? No? Okay, silence, a little bit of silence. Oh yeah, I see you back in the back, great, awesome. You must be from marketing, right?
I'm from
Oh, and you know growth hacking. Congratulations, that's awesome. Growth hacking is something that you might hate in your personal lives. We're gonna leverage it in technology because it really is the fusion of all these, this Venn diagram here, it's the fusion of looking at psychology, the mindset, originally the mindset of the buyer, the consumer. Here, it's the mindset of the learner, right? But you need to understand about how we can code and automate some of those messages, remember digital marketing techniques, but also understanding how to do creative marketing and reach them. So a growth hacker can add so much to the engagement on your teams. And you look here, portable skills, if you were a learning manager, you can understand, or the HR communications person, they have organizational knowledge and communication skills. What they need is to understand technology a little bit more and how that technology relates, how you can get those signals from outside to understand how to better create campaigns. And so with that, I have 1 minute for questions. I'm really sorry about that. But that does end my portion of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions around that, around what I just said, or anybody has any feedback about what you've seen here? Yeah, great.
If I'm audible, I'll not use the mic. I guess I'm audible.
Yes.
Thank you, Annee. So we have overwhelmed our learners with multiple opportunities in 3. How do we make them learn to learn? That becomes a big problem.
Yeah, that's a great, has anybody, you've done the Coursera course, Learning How to Learn? Yeah, it's an awesome course. It's a lot about the new role of L&D being the facilitators of learning and not the source of learning, right? And it's just creating that ecosystem, which makes a lot of sense to create that environment. When we talk about positive learning culture, I really suggest you guys go on degree.com and download. It's 48 pages. The answer to that question, that was a great question, is in those 48 pages, because the elements that we show you there is really about if you conduct a lot of that, you create that learning culture, and then it becomes that auto run, and you teach people how to learn instead of what to learn. And I'm a really big believer in that, because they know what to learn, huh? Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I'm out of time, and the reason why I brought my phone up here, thank you so much for the question. Oh, sorry, yeah. Can I go a little bit longer? Yeah, sure.
One question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all the insights. I'll be keen to understand if you have any quick tips for the role of a learning manager that you were talking about. In terms of the new skills, I saw systematic thinking, etc., coming up. So for areas which are very wide, let's say in cases where the organizations are really widespread, even
Right.
within the team, if there are sub-teams, people may not really understand the kind of work they're doing, and it's all very diverse. How do
Right.
we apply some of this? So if you have any quick tips, that'll be very helpful.
Yeah,
Thank
okay,
you.
so I have a really quick tip, and that is to go on Charles Jennings' site. He talks about going from, he's got a new L&D model that is about value creation, and he has this model that goes from order taker to value creator, and it's really focusing on the tasks they have. So teaching people about the tasks they have on hand to teach them about better performance. And when you do that, when you follow his model, in fact, you'll see there's 4 stages of it. Starting from order taker to enabling learning to being a partner, and then obviously being a value creator to the business. And when you look at those 4 steps, all 4 are necessary for a business model, but it teaches you the proportion, right? You need to do a lot more value creation and a lot less of order taking. Order taking will always be there, right? Thank you so much for your question.